The circus arrives without warning. There is no announcement in the papers, no advertisement on the radio, no buzz in the streets. Not a single poster is nailed to a wall, and yet there it is, sprawled across a field that was empty yesterday. You almost don't notice it at first. It appears with the indifference of weather, as if it had always been there. The sky is beginning to darken when you find the first hint, the faint smell of smoke and sugar. Something old and new all at once. Then the breeze shifts, and you catch a flicker. White stripes against black, black stripes against white, rising from the ground like towers in a dream. There is no entrance visible from where you stand, but you walk toward it anyway. You always do. Closer now, you can see the wrought iron gates, tall and curved, with designs so intricate they seem to shift as you look. A clock sits atop the arch, its hands ticking backward, then forward, then pausing as though unsure of which way time ought to move. Beside the gate is a sign, small, simple, elegant, opens at nightfall, closes at dawn. There is no mention of cost, no hours, no name. Only this, a circus that exists outside expectation. A thing made not to be scheduled or studied but felt, like weather, like music, or like magic. You return at nightfall. You don't remember making the decision. One moment you are in your home, brushing lint from your sleeve. The next your feet are carrying you back toward the field, as though you've been summoned. This time the gates are open. No one is there to greet you. No lines, no sound. Just the scent, caramel, vanilla, a twist of smoke, and the steady tick of a clock that seems pleased with your punctuality. You step inside. At first, you are surrounded by stillness. Then, movement. Tents stretch into the sky like cathedral spires. Each is different, but all are black and white. There are no banners, no blinking lights, no neon or velvet ropes. The paths are soft beneath your feet, dusted in what might be ash or snow or something else entirely. You see a carousel, its creatures moving slowly without music. A tent that exhales mist with each breath of wind. A girl in a white dress, disappearing behind a curtain of mirrors. You're not sure where to go. But it doesn't matter, because here, direction is irrelevant. There is no map, no order. The circus is not meant to be navigated. It is meant to be explored. You take your first step forward. Somewhere behind you, a bell rings once, low and distant, like a memory. And then, the circus begins. Chapter 1. Bound. The letter arrived on a wet afternoon, the ink already smudged by the time Hector Bowen retrieved it from the theater's rusted box. He slid it open with a lacquered thumbnail, flipping the envelope upside down until a slim fold of paper dropped into his hand. A single sheet, no return address, no perfume, no flourish, not even his name written on the envelope, just, to the magician, in rushed, upright strokes. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but the content made his lip curl with bitter amusement. She says she's yours. She breaks things without touching them. I'm done. The doctor says I won't last the month. She'll be at the station in the morning. She bites when cornered. He folded the note once, twice, tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, and stepped out into the rain. The girl stood under the soot-streaked station awning, a small damp valise at her feet, and a paper tag tied to her wrist. Someone had scrawled Celia Bowen on it in pencil, along with her date of birth and a second line that had been angrily scratched out. She stared at Hector with enormous gray eyes, one gloved hand wrapped around the handle of the valise, the other holding the sleeve of her dress up to her running nose. She did not move. She did not speak. "Your mother had a melodramatic streak," he said, halting a step before her, "but I suppose you knew that." The girl sniffled and said nothing. Hector sighed and crouched down. "You know who I am?" She nodded. "Good. Come on, then." She bent without complaint to retrieve her bag and followed him, step for step, out into the fog. Backstage at the theater, under gaslights that buzzed like bees trapped behind glass, Hector dropped the girl's valise onto a dusty chaise and turned to inspect her properly. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, pale, sharp-faced. Her boots were scuffed raw at the toes. Her hair hung wet down her back like lengths of black ribbon. She looked like a doll that had been left too long in the window. "Name?" he asked, as if testing her. "Celia," she said softly. "Last name?" She hesitated. Then, "Your name, I think." He snorted. "Not legally. I don't think the tag cares." She held out her wrist as if to demonstrate. The tag fluttered. He sat in the worn red chair by his dressing mirror and stared at her, the corners of his eyes creasing like paper. "Can you do anything else, besides breaking things?" Her nose twitched. "I didn't mean to break it." "Ah, so you did break something. What was it?" "A cup." He raised an eyebrow. "With your hands?" She shook her head. "With your mind?" She hesitated, then nodded. He reached for the small porcelain teacup that sat beside his makeup kit. "Break this one." She shrank back. "Go on. I won't be angry." "You will." "I won't," he said, with the flat certainty of someone for whom anger was simply a tool, not a reaction. She stared at the cup. Her lower lip trembled, and then, with a sharp crack, like a gunshot muffled in velvet, the teacup shattered. Not from the inside out, not from heat or vibration. It simply imploded, collapsing in on itself with a sound like paper tearing, ceramic shards scattering across the table and floor. Neither of them moved. "Good," said Hector. Celia burst into tears. An hour later, he poured himself 2 fingers of absinthe, watched the green liquid turn cloudy, and said aloud to the empty room, "She's better than I expected." The air in the dressing room shivered, and a man stepped through the wall. He was tall, thin, clothed in gray. Every thread on him seemed colorless by choice, not fading. His shoes were spotless despite the rain. He had no visible age, no lines, no stubble, no expression. Just a pair of pale eyes and a mouth that seemed entirely unfamiliar with smiling. "You've decided to play again," the man said. "She was dropped in my lap," Hector replied. "Would have been rude to ignore the invitation." The man stepped past the shattered remains of the teacup. "You understand what this requires." "I do." "She does not. Nor should she. Not yet." The man in gray folded his hands behind his back. "And you propose her as your student?" "Candidate," Hector corrected. "She's not learning tricks. This isn't a stage act." "Of course not," said the man almost gently. They stood in silence for a moment. "She's young," the man added. "They all are." "She has no training. That's what makes it interesting." The man's eyes narrowed. "Last time ended in ruin." Hector lifted the glass to his lips. "Last time, I was not involved." The man did not respond. After a moment, Hector added, "I assume you have someone in mind." "I do." "A boy?" The man inclined his head. "Already chosen?" "Years ago." "Then what are we waiting for?" The drawing room of the theater was empty, but for the girl, seated stiffly in a velvet chair, legs not quite touching the floor. Her feet swung once, then stilled as the 2 men entered. She watched them without speaking. "You'll need to give her the mark," Hector said. The man in gray stepped forward. "Do you know what a promise is, Celia?" She nodded. "Do you know what a binding is?" She shook her head. "It is like a promise, but heavier. Like a chain that no one can see, but that always pulls." She looked uncertain. "This is not a punishment. It is a beginning." He took a silver ring from his pocket and placed it on the table. Then he produced a small knife. Celia drew back. "It will sting," he said, "but only for a moment." Hector held her hand firmly as the man made a tiny cut on the tip of her finger. A single drop of blood welled up and fell onto the ring. The metal flared white-hot and vanished in a wisp of smoke. Her eyes widened. The man in gray leaned close. "You are bound now, Celia Bowen. You will train. You will perform. And one day, you will face your opponent. But you will not know who he is." She stared at him. "Is it a game?" He considered. "In some ways. Can I win?" "That is not always up to you." She turned to Hector. "Is he the one who decides?" Hector smiled without warmth. "I'm the one who teaches you to win." Later, as the gray-suited man vanished back into whatever pocket of the world he had come from, Hector fetched a thick book from his shelf and dropped it onto the table beside her. The cover read, "Theory and Practice of Manipulative Enchantments in Faded Gold." "We begin at once," he said. "I want to go home," she replied. "This is your home now." She stared at the book. "I don't like reading," she muttered. "You'll learn," he said, and turned away. And Celia Bowen, age 6, fingers still aching from the cut, looked down at the dense, narrow print of the book she couldn't read, and blinked back the fresh salt burn in her eyes. But the shattered teacup still glittered faintly on the floor, and she knew she had done it. She had made it happen. That thought, more than fear or sadness, was what stayed with her. That thought is what made her stay. Chapter 2. The Orphan and the Scholar. The orphanage is not one of those Dickensian nightmares painted in soot and screams. It is orderly, quiet. The hallways smell of starch and chalk, and something sour that no one bothers to name. A long-suffering headmistress patrols the dormitories like a ghost who resents being noticed. Children learn to speak softly, walk lightly, and keep their sleeves clean. It is not a cruel place, merely indifferent. The man in the gray suit steps through its front doors on a spring morning without knocking. The receptionist glances up from her ledger and freezes, as if startled by the absence of color. His coat, his gloves, even the tie at his collar are all the color of ash before it falls apart. No buttons gleam, no shadow falls behind him. He removes his gloves one finger at a time. "I've come to see the boy," he says. The receptionist blinks. "Which boy?" He doesn't answer. Instead, he sets a slim envelope on the desk. No name written on it, only a delicate wax seal. When she opens it, her hand trembles. 5 minutes later, he is led to a dim classroom where 12 boys sit hunched over slates. He points to one. That one. The boy looks up, blinkless, calm. Marco is not the name he was born with, but it is the one he is given. Mr. A.H. considers a list of names and selects it the way one might choose the right paperweight, something durable, silent, unlikely to fall apart under pressure. Marco does not ask why he has been chosen. He does not cry when the carriage takes him away. He does not wave goodbye to the children he never spoke to. When asked, days later, if he remembers anything from the orphanage, he says only, "The clocks were always wrong." The flat in London is nestled above a rare bookshop, accessed through a narrow green door that never opens from the outside. Marco is given a single room, a narrow bed, and more books than he can read in 5 lifetimes. They line every wall, shelved by subjects that seem half-invented: sympathetic harmonics, memory binding, recursive illusion theory. There are no toys, no friends, no stories before sleep. Every day, Mr. A.H. sits across from him at the long dining table and asks questions like, "How would you hide a coin in a person's memory? What's the difference between truth and permanence? Is a thing still magic if no one sees it?" Marco rarely answers correctly at first. When he fails, Mr. A.H. closes the book without anger, stands, and leaves the room. Marco learns to hate the sound of a book, shutting more than any slap. He begins to read faster. Time, in the flat, becomes a thing measured not in hours but in books. Marco reads The Constructed Will twice before understanding even the first chapter. When he finally manages to move a matchstick across a tabletop with nothing but thought, Mr. A.H. does not applaud. "Again," he says. Marco does it again, and again, until he can light the match, extinguish it, make it float, then vanish, until he can hold fire in his hand without burning. He never calls Mr. A.H. Father. That word is not offered, and Marco does not need it. One evening, Mr. A.H. leads him to the center of the study, where the floorboards have been cleared of rugs. A thin circle is drawn in chalk on the wood. No windows are open, and yet the air stirs. "Step inside," he says. Marco obeys. Mr. A.H. pulls a silver ring from his coat. He holds it in one palm, and the metal rises slowly until it floats between them. "I will not cut you," he says. "You're not made for blood. Your signature will be thought." Marco looks at the ring. Its edges are not sharp, but they seem to hum with pressure. "You will be bound to an opponent," the man says, "whom you will not meet for many years. You will be bound to a venue not yet chosen. You will be bound to a game without rules." Marco says nothing. You will compete without knowing how to win, or when, or why. You may not even recognize your opponent when you meet them. The game will end only when it must. "Will I win?" Marco asks. The man gives no answer. The ring floats closer, hovering inches from Marco's chest. "Think," says Mr. A.H. Marco closes his eyes. He thinks not of victory or defeat, not of magic or books. He thinks of the clocks that were always wrong. He thinks of the weight of silence. He thinks of the matchstick that once refused to move. The ring flares. The circle glows. When he opens his eyes, the floor is blank again. The ring is gone. So is the weight behind his eyes. Something has been taken, or sealed. He cannot tell. Mr. A.H. nods once and returns to the chair by the fire. Marco is left standing alone. The binding is complete. The following morning, Marco is handed a list of topics to master before summer: mnemonic concealment, sigil formation, dimensional folding, and 4 languages he does not yet speak. He does not flinch. His hands are ink-stained. His wrists ache from holding books open too long, but there is a fire in his chest now, something quiet and sharp. It has no name, but he knows it will grow, and when the game begins, wherever and however it begins, he will be ready. Chapter 3. Smoke and Paper Birds. The mirror shattered before she touched it. Not a crack, not a spider web, but a full collapse, glass folding inward with a sigh, raining down in silver daggers that caught the gaslight and scattered it in 10,000 directions. Celia stood in the middle of the parlor, arms at her sides, fists clenched. Her breath came short and fast. She hadn't screamed. That was the only victory. Hector stood in the doorway, arms folded, unimpressed. "You were trembling," he said. "I wasn't." "You were, and it showed." "I fixed it," she muttered. He stepped over the broken glass without glancing down. Fixing something after it breaks isn't the same as control. Celia raised her chin. "I didn't break it." "Yes, you did." He leaned in. "You just didn't mean to." Behind her eyes, the mirror still cracked, a jagged echo. He walked around her in a slow circle. "Do you think when the game begins, your opponent will be kind? Will offer you tea and a head start? This isn't sleight of hand, Celia. This isn't performance. This is war." She turned to face him. "You said it was a game. It's both. I don't want to fight anyone." Hector's hand snapped through the air, striking her cheek so fast she barely saw it coming. She staggered back a step. Her jaw stung. "I don't care what you want," he said quietly. "I care what you are." She did not cry, not this time. By the next morning, her face bore only the faintest shadow of a bruise, a soft discoloration under one eye that made her look oddly grown. The house smelled of burnt cinnamon and old paint, as always. She padded barefoot through the hall, her hand trailing the edge of the wallpaper. A fine seam tore beneath her fingertip, and she closed it before it unraveled. In the drawing room, the mirror had been replaced with an exact duplicate, already hung, already spotless. She stared into it and forced the image to ripple. Her reflection grinned back with teeth that weren't hers, just to prove she could. She spent the morning with the cards. Each one was blank. Each had to be memorized, then transformed. She was to assign meaning to suits that didn't exist. Hector would glance once at a card and expect her to repeat it perfectly 5 hours later. Memory wasn't the test. Memory was a floor. The real test was stability. Could she keep her mind still enough to hold the illusion of 76 cards, each uniquely formed, each with a weight in the hand, a scent, a temperature? Could she believe her own illusions long enough that they became something real? At noon, Hector walked in and knocked the table over. Cards flew like startled birds. Celia didn't blink. She kept every single one in the air, rotating around her like a miniature solar system. Then, one by one, she returned them to the table in perfect order. Hector said nothing, but he didn't flip the table again. It was later, long after supper, when she found the paper. A single torn page, curling on the edge of the hearth. She wasn't sure what made her stop and pick it up. It was yellowed, brittle, useless. But she took it, smoothed it between her palms, and folded once, twice again. Not like a schoolgirl, not the way the governesses taught their stiff little swans. She folded it by instinct. A small bird took shape. Not a dove, not a crane, something in between. She blew across its wings and whispered, "Go." It shuddered. She blinked. It flapped. The paper bird lifted off her palm with the quietest rustle, like the first page of a forgotten book turning in the dark. She watched, breathless, as it circled the room once, twice, then landed on the edge of a candlestick and tucked its head beneath its wing. She sat down slowly on the floor, legs crossed, eyes wide. Not illusion, not a trick, not memory. The bird was there. It preened. It shifted its weight from foot to foot. Its wings were soft-edged and faintly translucent, but they cast a real shadow on the wall. A whisper of wings overhead. "I saw that," came Hector's voice. Celia didn't look up. He crossed the room in 3 slow steps and extended one finger toward the bird. It lifted its head and clicked its beak at him, a sound like flint on flint. "Not bad," he said, and for once there was something close to admiration in his tone. "You didn't simply suggest its presence. You created it." Celia said nothing. "Do you know what the difference is?" She shook her head. "Belief," he said. "Most people can't shape anything real because they don't believe what they're making. They hope. They try, but they don't know. You believed this into existence." He reached out again. The paper bird hissed, not a noise that paper should make, and snapped at his finger. He laughed. Then he turned on his heel and walked away. "Don't get clever," he called over his shoulder. "You haven't even touched transformation yet." Celia stroked the bird's paper wings and whispered to it softly, without words. She didn't need to understand what she had done. She just needed to know it worked. The bird blinked and stayed. Chapter 4. The Circus Beneath the Ink. The bird was still there the next morning. Its wings were curled in, one eye half shut in a state of rest. The paper had yellowed slightly, as though it had aged overnight, but when Celia whispered to it again, it stirred. Hector did not comment. He glanced once and continued reading. By afternoon, the bird took flight again. She did not tell it to. It simply did. Miles away, in a Parisian salon soaked in late-night absinthe and velvet smoke, a man in a sapphire brocade jacket reached across a cluttered table and plucked a cherry from someone else's glass. "That," Chandresh Christophe Lefebvre said, is the stupidest idea I've ever heard." His voice was effortlessly precise, each syllable trimmed and cut like glass. Around the table the others laughed. Not at him, no one laughed at Chandresh, but at the sheer audacity of his moods. "Do elaborate," said Madame Anna Padva, reclining among cushions with her fox stole still draped across one arm. She was easily 20 years older than Chandresh, and dressed like she was 5 decades younger. He tossed the cherry in the air and caught it between his teeth. "Another opera house? Another playhouse? You may as well build another fountain in Versailles. It's all been done." "Then what do you want to do?" Anna asked, brushing ash from her sleeve. "I don't want to build something." Chandresh stood. "I want to conjure something." He crossed to the window, flung it open. Smoke and city air swept in, tangled with violin music from the street below. "I want a spectacle," he said. "A breathing dream. I want an audience that forgets to clap. I want to turn the night inside out and fill it with wonder." He turned to face them, wineglass in hand. "I want a circus." The room went quiet. Then Mr. Barris, seated neatly in a wooden chair with a journal balanced on one knee, cleared his throat. Circus? Yes. With clowns and elephants? No." Chandresh paced now, silk robe billowing like stage curtains. "No elephants, no sawdust, no red stripes or brass bands, something elegant, timeless, no announcements, no posters, a circus that appears without warning and disappears before dawn." "You'll need performers," said Anna. "Not performers, architects of experience. You'll need tents, each tent its own world. Tickets? No charge, no currency. If they can find it, they may enter." The silence that followed was not skeptical. It was charged, curious, hungry. Finally, Mr. Barris, the most practical of the group, leaned forward. "Who funds it?" Chandresh smiled. "Leave that to me." The next morning, his valet found Chandresh hunched at his writing desk, hair disheveled, waistcoat still buttoned from last night. He had ink on his fingertips and a dozen half-written letters strewn before him. One had already been sealed in black wax. It bore no address. Only a silver symbol, a perfect hand-drawn circle with no beginning or end. The letter found its way not through postal routes but by other means. No address, no courier. Yet it arrived, placed precisely on a closed book in a London flat, where Mr. A.H. set down his teacup, opened the seal, and read the contents with no visible change in expression. Across the room, Marco paused his reading. "Is it from her?" "No," said Mr. A.H. He folded the letter in half, then in quarters, and slid it into the fireplace. The paper curled instantly, swallowed by flame. "It's time," he said. Marco's hand tightened on the book's spine. "For what?" Mr. A.H. turned toward the window. "To build the board." A week later, Chandresh stood in the center of an empty field just beyond Prague, the grass knee-high and blowing east. Behind him stood 5 others, Anna Padva in a cream dress unsuited for travel, Mr. Barris with a canvas tube of blueprints, and 3 performers from various corners of his past shows. He closed his eyes. There was no music. There was no audience. There was only the idea. "I don't want it to feel like anything," he said aloud. "I want it to feel like nothing else." He turned and pointed to the center of the field. "The gates go there." In the months that followed, there were sketches and silk swatches, perfume tests and whisper-thin paper samples, arguments about tent heights and transport methods. But the vision remained unchanged. No color but black, white, and shades between. No sounds but those conjured on sight. Everything to open only at night. Every detail infused with impossible precision. Sometimes blueprints would arrive unsigned, with no traceable return. They came folded perfectly, the ink impossibly fine, depicting structures that defied standard physics, spirals within spheres, endless corridors, tents with no fixed dimensions. Mr. Barris said nothing. He built them all. In the London flat, Marco closed his eyes and ran his fingers across the grain of his desk. A miniature model of a tent sat before him, its walls made of folded light. He had built it from nothing but theory and thought. When he opened his eyes, the tent was spinning slowly in midair. He smiled. Across the city, Celia stood in a theater's rafters, a teacup in her palm. She dropped it. It never hit the ground. In a city of no name, in a building that did not exist on maps, Hector Bowen sipped his drink and watched a new name being lettered onto parchment in a looping, elegant hand: Le Cirque des Rêves, the Circus of Dreams. Chapter 5. The Illusionist and the Assistant. The circus opened with no grand announcement. At dusk, the field outside Munich had been nothing but grass and mist. By midnight, there were gates. By dawn, the town buzzed with rumors of tents black and white, of sweet, spiced smoke, of music that seemed to bleed through walls. The clock in the center of the gates had no numbers. Its hands moved backward, then forward, ticking softly with a rhythm that made sleep difficult for anyone nearby. Celia Bowen arrived before the sun rose. She stood outside the gate, her trunk beside her, gloved hands wrapped around the handle of a single umbrella despite the clear sky. The night's dew clung to the grass, silvering her boots. A valet, one of Chandresh's, waited nearby with a clipboard and a faintly panicked expression. "You're the illusionist," he said, more to himself than to her. "They didn't say you'd be early." "I'm never late," she replied. He cleared his throat. "This way, please." The circus interior was still, no guests, no movement. The tents were in their places, sleeping under starlight, their stripes motionless. Celia walked slowly, as if moving through a dream she half recognized. The wind tugged her skirts, but she paid it no mind. Her eyes took in everything: the spiral pathways, the hidden lights, the soft scent of caramel and ice. It was more beautiful than she'd imagined, and also more dangerous. They passed a tent with no door, only a silver curtain that moved of its own accord. "Who designed that one?" she asked. The valet flipped through his clipboard. "No name," he said. "Most of the plans are anonymous." Celia raised a brow but said nothing. She was led to a round tent with mirrored interior walls and a raised platform at the center. "You'll rehearse here," the man said. "Perform here as well. The other tents are exhibits, installations, illusions. Yours is the show." Of course it was. She opened her trunk and stepped inside without waiting to be asked. Marco was already there. Not in the tent, in the circus. He had been here for weeks, working silently behind Chandresh's productions, implementing magical structures through false paperwork and quiet enchantment. His name appeared nowhere, not even on his own correspondence. He wrote in invisible ink, sealed letters with mental locks, and moved through the circus like a ghost. But he was no ghost. He sat now in the operations tent, a ledger open before him, when Chandresh himself burst in with his usual storm of silk and purpose. "She's here," he said. "Who?" Marco asked, though he already knew. "The illusionist, the one with the mirrors." Marco looked down at the page again, feigning disinterest. "She'll need orientation," Chandresh added, lighting a cigarette with a snap of his fingers. "She'll manage," Marco replied. "She's your responsibility now. You're still technically my assistant, aren't you?" Marco didn't respond, not out loud. He found her late that afternoon, standing in the center of her tent, surrounded by floating glass. Dozens of hand mirrors spun lazily around her, suspended in midair. Each one reflected a different version of her face, older, younger, distorted, laughing, silent. As he entered, a few of the mirrors shifted, tilting in his direction, but did not reflect him. Interesting. She glanced at him but didn't flinch. "Are you meant to be here?" she asked. He bowed slightly. "Only if I'm welcome." "That depends on whether you're interrupting." "I'm observing." "You're standing," she said, and breathing rather loudly. He almost smiled. "I'm Marco," he said, stepping into the circle of mirrors. "Assistant to Mr. Lefebvre." Celia turned her attention back to the glass. One mirror spun too fast and shattered mid-air. She caught the shards before they hit the floor and reassembled them with a flick of her wrist. "That seems unnecessary," Marco said, watching the process. "Precision," she replied. "Even accidents should obey it." He stepped closer. "May I?" "May you what?" He gestured to the remaining mirrors. "Participate." Celia studied him. The mirrors slowed. "Go on, then." He lifted one hand, palm open. A single mirror drifted toward him, hovered, then froze. Its surface warped like water. For a moment nothing showed. Then Celia's face, sleeping. Then Marco's face, on fire. Then a ring, silver, vanishing into smoke. Celia blinked and the mirror exploded. They both flinched. The shards did not fall. They hovered, suspended between them, motionless and sharp. Celia lowered her hand. "Who taught you that?" Marco tilted his head. "Who taught you?" There was a long pause. Then, as if on cue, both released their hands. The shards dropped, landing silently on the carpeted floor. "I suppose we'll be seeing more of each other," she said. He nodded. It would seem so. She extended a hand. He took it. Her grip was warm. His was cold. For a moment, just a moment, something passed between them. Not electricity, not heat, recognition, but they said nothing of it. Not yet. That night, when the circus opened for the first time, guests drifted into Celia's tent and emerged speechless. Some believed they'd seen themselves die. Others swore the mirrors whispered secrets meant only for them. Some turned back at the threshold. Marco stood just outside, notebook in hand, recording none of it. Only watching. When she caught him at the edge of the crowd, he nodded once. She did not nod back. She simply turned, and the mirrors closed behind her like a slow, rippling curtain of light. Chapter 6. Tents of Fire and Breath. The circus grew stranger with every night it opened. Not louder, not wilder, just stranger. The guests did not notice. They wandered from tent to tent with sweet smoke in their hair, hands sticky with sugar-dusted confections, hearts beating with dreams they didn't know they had. But the tents had begun to hum. Not literally, not out loud. But if one stood still long enough, just beyond the torches, in the black velvet spaces between tents, the vibrations became tangible, like something massive shifting beneath the soil. Celia noticed. Marco noticed too. The first new tent appeared without announcement. It wasn't on Chandresh's blueprint, nor on any of Mr. Barris's careful sketches. But there it was. One morning, just after dawn, sitting neatly at the edge of the courtyard like it had always belonged. The outside was simple. A matte black dome with no visible entrance, no rope, no signage, just a slit in the fabric, barely wider than a human shoulder. Celia waited until after dusk to enter. Inside, the air was dry and heavy, scented with cedar and smoke. The walls flickered. She turned slowly on the spot. The dome's interior was filled with flame, ribbons of it suspended in mid-air, each one twisting silently above the floor. Some burned blue, others white. None emitted heat. In the center, a tree. It was black as coal, yet living, its branches covered in glass leaves that tinkled as they moved. Fire coiled through the branches like a lazy serpent, never touching the wood. Celia stood beneath it, and the flames moved aside as if recognizing her presence. She didn't need to ask who made it. She turned and left without speaking to anyone. Marco returned the favor. 2 nights later, Celia's addition appeared, a tent made entirely of silk and steam. The entrance draped like fog, and the interior had no floor, only floating platforms connected by threads of light. Guests moved across them like weightless insects, each step playing soft notes that disappeared into the ether. The air shimmered with illusions, orchids blooming from breath, hourglasses pouring stars instead of sand, a clock with no hands that beat like a heart. Marco entered after midnight. He stayed longer than he meant to. By the following week, the duel was fully underway. Not that they said so, not that anyone else knew, but each tent became a move. Celia's tent of snow that never melted, Marco's tent of impossible books, each one containing a dream the reader once forgot. Celia's labyrinth of mirrored hallways, with no end but always a way out. Marco's maze of doors that opened into memories not your own, no rules, no judges, only escalation. They crossed paths occasionally, not often. He would pass her on the way to the carousel, and she would glance only long enough to nod. She would be reading in the courtyard with a cup of tea that never cooled, and he would pause but say nothing. Their conversations, when they happened, were shaped like riddles. "You've been busy," she said one night, standing just outside the tent of breathing statues. "And you've been showing off," he replied. She smirked. "Should I not?" "I didn't say that." They never touched, but their tents touched each other. They echoed, mirrored, replied. Celia constructed a chamber where guests lay in hammocks suspended by wind. Marco responded with a sky of black kites tethered to nothing, each carrying a name stitched in thread. Celia conjured a garden of glass birds that sang only when no one was listening. Marco gave her back a tunnel of smoke that told stories in whispers when no one spoke. One night, well past midnight, Celia stood alone at the center of the courtyard, coat unbuttoned, hair loose, watching the shadows shift between tents. She knew he was there before he stepped out. "I like the kites," she said. Marco approached, hands in his pockets. "I liked the garden." There was a long silence between them, not uncomfortable, just suspended, like a held breath. "Is it always like this?" she asked softly. "This trading of wonders?" "No," Marco said. "This is the first time it's ever worked." She turned to look at him. Their eyes met. There was no smile, no heat, but something sparked in the space between them, unspoken, undeniable. The tents were no longer just moves. They were letters, love letters, arguments, flirtations written in shadow and fire. Neither of them said it aloud. Neither of them dared. But the game had changed, and the circus was changing with it. Chapter 7. Paper Stars and Burning Trees. The first tent to vanish was Marco's. Not literally, it didn't disappear into air, but it faded. Guests still entered it, those who found the black and gold sign shaped like a quill and returned murmuring words like quiet, gravity, sorrow. But something in the magic had wilted, not weakened, just softened, as if the tent were exhaling, pausing, waiting for a response. Celia noticed. She waited 4 days. Then she made her move. The new tent had no structure at all. It looked from the outside like a tornado had been frozen mid-spin and dipped in silver. Fabric stretched into air in irregular shapes, cords vanished into the sky, and there was no clear entrance. Guests stood nearby for hours, unsure if they were meant to approach it at all, but eventually someone walked forward and simply disappeared into it. Word spread. By midnight, it was the only tent with a line. Inside, darkness and silence. Then, slowly, the air changed. Something rustled. Something flickered. Paper stars drifted down from the sky, so many that the guests inside instinctively looked for ceilings, only to find there were none. The stars landed in their palms, their hair, their coats. Some unfolded into small birds. Some dissolved into ash. Some whispered names. One child burst into quiet tears without knowing why. One woman turned to leave and found herself face to face with a paper version of her father, holding a lantern made from breath. Celia watched it all from the far corner of the tent. She did not smile, but her heartbeat matched the tempo of the drifting stars. Marco stood outside the entrance. He hadn't gone in yet. He didn't want to. He knew what it was. He could feel her hand in every detail, every hesitation, every echo of something both deeply personal and maddeningly inaccessible. It was not a challenge. It was a memory, but not his, and that was the most infuriating part. By dawn, he had already begun his response. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He walked in circles around the unfinished tent shell he conjured in a clearing just beyond the carousel and let the anger work itself into shape. The tent would be circular, simple, but its interior would not hold illusions. It would hold fire, real fire, and not fire meant to warm or dazzle, fire that moved, fire that followed. When completed, the tent would allow each guest to walk barefoot across black stone while flames chased their footsteps, never catching, never harming, but always on the edge of touch. And in the center, a tree. The same tree from before, but this time it would burn, not completely, just enough to whisper that it could, that it wanted to, and it would only go still when someone said a name that mattered to them more than their own. Only then would the flames calm. Only then would the stone cool. It was petty, maybe, too pointed, but she had started it. Celia stepped into the tent 2 nights later. She walked the black stone with her arms crossed behind her back, not flinching as the flames leapt behind her. She reached the tree. It was beautiful, crackling softly, elegant in its threat. She stared up at it. Her voice was barely a breath. Marco. The fire stilled, and then it bowed. After that, the pace of creation changed. It was no longer about better. It was about deeper. Celia built a room where time folded back on itself. Guests entered and saw an older version of themselves sitting on a bench, waiting. When they returned later, they sat on the bench and saw their younger selves enter. Marco constructed a tent of string. Every thread represented a choice. Guests left unable to say which path they'd taken. They added nothing to the guidebooks, no explanations, no names. The tents were never labeled by their creators, but the others began to notice. Tsukiko, Anapadva, even Chandresh, between his silken performances and wine-fueled galas, began to sense that something in the circus was no longer under his control. The balance had shifted, and it was no longer a show. On the 5th anniversary of the circus, Celia returned to her tent of mirrors. The glass had dulled. The reflections no longer whispered. She stood in the center, arms loose at her sides. Marco entered quietly behind her. She didn't turn. "You're avoiding the courtyard," she said. "It's grown crowded," he replied. "You made it crowded." She smiled faintly. They stood in silence. Then he asked, "Do you still think you'll win?" She didn't move. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes I think we're not even playing the same game." "We're not," he said, "but we're still the only ones playing." They stood a moment longer. Then he raised one hand and fixed a shard of glass that had cracked months ago. She raised her hand, and the glass vanished entirely. They both laughed. Outside, the guests filled the walkways with soft murmurs and rustling silk. No one noticed the firelight deep in the trees, or the paper stars caught in the branches, or the way the tents leaned subtly toward each other as if listening. Chapter 8. The Rêves. The boy did not mean to climb the fence. He had only meant to look. The circus had arrived in Concord, Massachusetts without warning, as it always did, on a clear autumn morning when the air smelled of cold apples and chimney smoke. One evening the field behind the orchard was empty. By dawn there were tents. Bailey Clark was 12, the son of a hardware merchant, and a woman who counted every penny 3 times before spending one. He was not the kind of boy who snuck out at night. He was the kind of boy who cleaned his shoes with vinegar and lined his books up by color. But he couldn't stop thinking about the circus, The field was silent when he arrived, just after sunset. The tents loomed in a kind of hush. He stood at the fence for 10 minutes, one hand wrapped around a slat, heart knocking softly against his ribs. He hadn't told anyone he was going. He didn't plan to go in, but something pulled. The gate was locked. The sign said, "Closed until nightfall," in elegant lettering, but Bailey found a gap in the fence behind the farthest tent, where the boards had bent outward and never quite been nailed back. He squeezed through. It was quiet inside, not dead quiet, alive quiet, the kind of quiet a forest makes when you're not meant to be there. The torches were unlit. The tents loomed, black and white in the dusk. He took 3 steps before he heard the whisper. "Boy." He froze. A flicker of motion. Someone moved behind a tent, soundless, fast. Then she appeared. She was taller than him, older, 16 maybe more, dressed in white with black gloves and a hat that didn't cast a shadow. "Not open yet," she said. Bailey's throat felt dry. "I just wanted to see." The girl tilted her head. Then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Not unkind either. It was the kind of smile someone gives a coin before flipping it. She pulled something from her coat. A scarf. Striped black and white. Soft. Much too fine for a child. "Take it," she said. "Why?" "It looks better on someone who's been inside." And before he could ask what she meant, she was gone. Vanished into the gap between tents. Bailey returned home without remembering how he left. He folded the scarf and hid it in a drawer beneath his winter shirts. He never spoke of the girl. He never told anyone he'd seen inside, but from that day on, he watched. He watched the circus every time it came back. And it always came back. Not on a schedule, not even once a year. But often enough that Bailey learned to expect it, without knowing he was doing so. He was not the only one. All across the world, small groups began to form. People who followed the circus from city to city. They traveled by train, by carriage, by foot. They arrived just before the gates opened and disappeared after they closed. They called themselves rêveurs, dreamers. They wore scarves striped in black and white, not sold at any booth, not found in any market. They shared letters with descriptions of new tents, debated theories, swapped stories. Some said the circus only opened for those who believed. Others said belief had nothing to do with it. But they came. They always came. In London, a man named Thiessen published anonymous articles titled Night Gardens and Starless Worlds, claiming to have documented every tent in existence. His readers tried to verify the details. None could. In Prague, 2 sisters mapped the circus on velvet, using thread instead of ink. Their map never stopped growing. In Boston, Bailey Clark turned 18 and quietly packed a bag. He didn't tell his family. He only left a note with the words, "I have to know how it works." Inside the circus, Marco paused outside a tent shaped like a seashell and watched a small group of guests pass by. 5 of them, all wearing black and white scarves. He said nothing, but he noticed. Celia passed a pair of visitors whispering in French, taking notes on the hourglass garden. One of them looked at her with wide eyes. She vanished before they could ask her name. She noticed, too. The circus had started as a stage for a game, but now the audience had found its own place. They weren't performers. They weren't pawns. They were something else. A crowd of dreamers standing just outside the circle, not playing, but watching, waiting. Chapter 9. Threads Pulled Too Tight. The tent collapsed on a Thursday. Not publicly, no guests were harmed, no child cried out beneath canvas. But it happened, and those who understood the structure knew what it meant. The tent in question had been simple from the outside, white with silver pinstriping, no signage. Inside it was a room of floating lights, suspended by invisible wires, each one flickering with someone's memory. A first kiss, a lost dog, A snowfall remembered only by one person. The lights fell, every single one. Tsukiko found the wreckage first. She stood among the smoldering filaments, motionless, her bare feet scattering ash across the silk floor. The air smelled like burnt sugar and copper. She tilted her head. Then, without comment, she turned and walked away. In the operations tent, Marco stood perfectly still while Chandresh yelled. "You said it was stable," Chandresh shouted, hands flinging papers that weren't even related to the incident. "It was." "Then why did it implode like a bloody soufflé?" "It wasn't structural," Marco said. "It was magical." "Well, whose magic?" Marco did not answer. Chandresh's breath came sharp and fast. The dark crescents beneath his eyes had grown deeper in recent weeks. His gloves were mismatched, something Marco noted only because Chandresh never mismatched anything. "You've been distracted," Chandresh accused. "The guests notice things. They've been talking. The girl with the gloves, Celia, your illusionist. She's far too good. People think she's real." "She is real." Chandresh narrowed his eyes. "She's not part of the original design." "Neither is most of this," Marco said too quietly. Chandresh stared at him. Then, in a low voice, "Is there something I should know?" Marco wanted to say yes. He wanted to sit down, pour a drink, explain every page of the invisible contract, but instead he said, "No." Tara Burgess noticed it next. She and her sister Lainey had been with the circus since the first tent pole went up. Not performers, investors, collaborators, spectators who became part of the fabric. But Tara had always watched more closely than the others. She noticed how the tents no longer obeyed the center paths, how the paper programs changed without anyone printing them, how the light inside the circus never seemed to come from the lanterns anymore. She watched Celia rehearse with mirrors that didn't reflect her properly. She watched Marco adjust blueprints that no one had drawn. She watched the fire inside the clock tower grow brighter. One evening, Tara approached Celia. It was not a confrontation. It was a question. They stood beneath the carousel, where the painted animals turned slower than usual, and the air smelled faintly of oranges. "How long has it been going on?" Tara asked. Celia didn't answer at first. "Define it," she said eventually. "The thing that keeps this place alive," Tara said. "The thing no one talks about. The reason you and the boy with the quiet voice always seem to walk opposite directions." Celia looked away. Tara followed her gaze toward the courtyard, where the rêveurs were gathering in a small, quiet circle. "I don't want to stop it," Tara said. "I want to understand it." Celia's voice was barely audible. "So do I." Tara stepped closer. "You're afraid?" "No," Celia said. "I'm tired." That was the last anyone saw of Tara Burgess. 2 nights later, her body was found at the edge of the grounds, between the trees. No wound, no injury, no note. Only a mark. A small symbol, drawn in ash, behind one ear. A perfect circle. Lainey screamed when she saw it. Tsukiko did not scream. She simply looked at the mark and said, "It has begun unraveling," and walked away. Marco broke a teacup when he heard, not magically, just his hand. The porcelain cracked in his grip, blood beading across his palm, and for a moment he stood in the dark, watching the red drip into the white of his cuff. He did not move, he did not speak. The cup floated back together, but the crack inside him stayed. Celia found him in the labyrinth tent. It was raining inside. It wasn't supposed to be. He didn't look at her. "She asked questions," he said. "She was right to. She died because of us." "No," Celia said. "She died because someone was afraid of what she'd learn." They stood there as the rain slid down mirrors that weren't mirrors anymore, only reflections of thoughts neither of them dared say aloud. "I'm ending it," Marco said. She stepped forward. "How?" He turned toward her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw the lines in his face, not age but wear. "I don't know." Later, in her tent, Celia folded another paper bird. But this one wouldn't fly. She set it down. It turned to ash. Chapter 10. The Contortionist's Warning. Tsukiko watched the candle burn down to nothing. She did this most nights, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her tent after the last guest had wandered out, letting the wax pool against the silk mat while her spine remained perfectly straight. Her face was still, her breathing quiet, her eyes fixed not on the flame, but on the space above it. She listened for threads. She had learned long ago that magic did not hum like a violin or hiss like wind. It threaded, through people, through places, through time. And something in the circus was coming undone. She found Celia near the carousel. The horses were still, though the wind tugged gently at their manes. One of them, a black stallion with ivory hooves, shivered when Tsukiko passed, though no hand touched it. Celia sat on the edge of the fountain, shoes off, toes grazing the surface of the still water. Her gloves were tucked into her coat pocket. Her eyes were red, though she wasn't crying now. Tsukiko approached silently. Celia didn't turn. "You don't normally involve yourself." "No," Tsukiko said. "I don't." There was a long pause. Then, "Why now?" Tsukiko's voice was soft, but not gentle. "Because it is time." Celia finally looked up. "I don't know how to end it," she said. Tsukiko said nothing. "You knew something was wrong with Tara," Celia added. "You knew." "Yes." "Why didn't you stop it?" "Because I cannot stop what I did not start." Celia stood. "Then what can you do?" Tsukiko met her gaze. For the first time her expression cracked, not in grief, not in anger, but in memory. "I can tell you the rules." Inside Tsukiko's tent, the air was thick with incense that smelled like burned tea leaves and crushed stone. Celia sat across from her on the floor. Between them, a piece of silk cloth, inked with strange, fluid symbols that shifted when Celia looked too closely. Tsukiko reached for a small black box. When she opened it, there were 2 rings inside. One was made of ivory, one of ash. "I was once what you are now," Tsukiko said. Celia blinked. "You were in the game?" "Yes." "Which were you, the challenger or the opponent?" Tsukiko gave the faintest smile. "Does it matter?" Celia didn't respond. "I won," Tsukiko said after a moment, "which means I lost." The candle flickered. Celia leaned in. "Who was the other?" "She is gone," Tsukiko said, "because she stayed too long. She held the threads too tightly, and when she fell, there was no one left to hold the circus together." "She died?" Tsukiko nodded once. "Not by blade, but by weight." Celia stared at the rings. "So that's how this ends? One of us falls?" "Yes." "No exceptions?" "Only one." Celia's hands curled in her lap. "What?" Tsukiko tapped the silk between them. "You must unbind yourselves before the circus tears you both apart. We don't know how." Tsukiko looked at her. "Then you must find a way." Marco felt the change before Celia arrived. He was alone in his tent, one of his oldest, a room of pages with no words. The parchment fluttered as she stepped through the entrance. He looked up. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "She was in a duel, like us." He didn't have to ask who. "She won," Celia added, "but the other lost everything." Marco's hand brushed one of the empty pages. "Is that what you think will happen to us?" "I think it already is." Silence hung between them. She sat beside him. The pages did not settle. They beat softly in the dark, like wings. "I'm afraid of what we're building," she whispered. Marco closed his eyes. "So am I." He turned his head slightly. Their shoulders touched. The contact was warm, steady. Neither moved away. That night, the circus opened late. Not for any reason guests could see. The lights flickered on a few minutes behind schedule. the gates unlocked without ceremony. But the Rêveurs whispered about it, and Tsukiko stood in the center of the courtyard and watched the stars, not the sky, the tents. They were beginning to flicker, and she knew what that meant. The threads were pulling too tight. Something would break soon. Chapter 11. The Lovers and the Lock. The sky was the wrong color. Not wrong like storm clouds or smoke. Just off. A shade too pale. The stars overhead shimmered but didn't twinkle. The moon was whole, but cast no proper shadows. Celia noticed first. She stepped out of her tent with her gloves tucked into her belt, her pulse loud in her ears. The moment she set foot on the central path, the fabric of the circus shuddered, imperceptibly, but real. A child dropped her caramel apple mid-bite and burst into tears. A Rêveur's compass began to spin. The fire at the top of the clock tower pulsed, as though breathing. Celia whispered to herself, "It's unraveling faster." Marco was waiting at the center of the wishing tree tent. He had known she would come. He didn't know how, only that she would. He stood beneath the blackened limbs as the ribbons hung motionless around him. No breeze, no guests, no wishes tonight. Celia stepped through the curtain like a breath. They didn't speak at first. The silence was heavy with meaning. Then, "It's accelerating," Marco said. "I know. There's too much weight in the tents, too much us." "It was never just tents," she whispered. "We made a world, and we tied ourselves to it. And to each other." Her breath caught slightly. "Have you found a way?" he asked. She shook her head. "You?" Marco hesitated. "Only something stupid." She looked at him fully now, really looked at him. The tired eyes, the fine tremble in his hands, the way his coat no longer sat right on his frame. He looked like a man trying to carry an entire illusion on his back. "What is it?" "Someone has to let go," he said. She said nothing. "You've seen the bindings," he went on. "You know it's not just magical, it's metaphysical. We're not competing, Celia. We're sustaining. This circus only breathes because we keep it alive. And if one of us stops breathing..." He didn't finish. She didn't need him to. They stood like that for a long time. The wishing tree loomed above them, ribbons sagging, wax drips frozen mid-fall. She reached out slowly, took his hand. This time he didn't vanish. "I won't survive it," she said softly. "I would rather it be me." "No." He stepped closer, eyes locked to hers. "I would rather vanish than watch you go." "You won't vanish," she said. "You don't know that." "I do." He searched her face. "How?" "Because I know what we built," she whispered, and then without a sound, she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, not urgent or fiery. It was still and infinite. The kind of kiss written not on mouths, but in the space between lives. A kiss stitched from mirrors and snow, fire and ash, suspended between two hands held too long across the same chessboard. When she pulled away, he didn't speak. When she let go of his hand, he didn't stop her. She turned and walked through the curtain. He followed. The plan was simple, stupid as Marco had said. They would lock themselves inside the circus, not with walls or gates, with magic, binding themselves not to the duel, but to the thing it had created, the circus itself, a loop, a seal. No one would win, but nothing would break, and no one else would be lost. That night, the circus grew quiet, not still, just waiting. As though every tent, every performer, every shadow knew something was about to change. Bailey, wrapped in his striped scarf, felt it. Tsukiko, silent beneath the stars, felt it. The Rêveurs stopped walking, stopped talking, and in the courtyard, where the clock struck midnight, the minute hand snapped. Celia and Marco stood across from each other in the heart of the labyrinth tent. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No." Good. They stepped forward together. Their hands met, and the circus folded around them like a dream going still, not ending, just holding its breath. Chapter 12. The Boy and the Flame. Bailey Clark did not mean to become part of the circus. He only meant to follow it, watch, observe, be close enough to understand. But when he returned to the field in Concord and found the tents gone, vanished without a trace, he knew something had changed, not just the circus, him. He followed the rumors across cities, Munich, Marseille, Budapest. Each time the circus arrived quietly. Each time he was there before it opened. He never entered right away. He waited. He watched. And the moment the gates opened, he walked straight inside. By now the performers knew him. He never said much, but he always left small gifts, a silver button, a folded map, a note with no signature. He never asked for anything in return, but the circus gave. One night in Prague, Bailey found himself alone in a tent he had never seen before. There was no color to it, only light and dust and a soft ticking sound, like a clock that wasn't trying too hard to keep time. At the center, a locked door. He shouldn't have had the key, but it was in his pocket. He turned it once, then stepped inside. The world shifted. The tent vanished. He was standing in the center of the courtyard, empty. No guests, no lights, no noise, only the clock tower, dark now, and a single flame hovering above the fountain. It was not fire, not entirely. It flickered like memory. He stepped toward it, and it spoke, not in words, but in presence. He saw them, Celia and Marco, not as people, not as ghosts, but as something else. Light, wrapped in intention. They were everywhere, in the tents, in the gears, in the ink and ice and breath and thread that held the circus together. They weren't gone. They were here, and they were tired. Bailey knelt beside the fountain. The flame hovered above his palm. No heat, just weight. He knew what it meant. The game was over. But the lock needed a new keeper. Not a magician, not a competitor. A caretaker. Someone who would carry the flame without trying to own it. Someone who believed. When he closed his fingers around the flame, it did not burn. It breathed. And when he opened his eyes, the circus was alive again. Lights flared, tents shimmered, music returned. And across the world, those who loved the circus felt a shiver run down their spines, like the moment a coin lands upright on its edge and does not fall. The rêveurs gathered in the courtyard, their scarves bright against the night. They did not ask questions. They only smiled, because they knew the circus was safe, for now. And in the shadows above the clock tower, where the flame once hung, two figures stood hand in hand, watching, unseen, unforgotten. Epilogue. You return. You return without meaning to. The city is unfamiliar. Narrow streets, crooked chimneys, storefronts with names in a language you don't speak. But as the sky begins to darken, something pulls you down a side street you almost miss. Your steps slower than usual, your breath caught on something invisible. Then, the scent, vanilla smoke, cold sugar, paper. Your heart skips once. And when you round the corner, you see it. The black and white striped tents. Exactly where they shouldn't be. Exactly as you remember. The gates are open tonight. They don't always open. You know this. You've followed the rumors long enough to understand that the circus chooses who enters. Not everyone can. Not every night. But tonight it has opened for you. The torches burn with their soft silver glow. The clock still ticks, though its hands now move at a tempo that matches your breath. The sign is there, as always. Opens at nightfall, closes at dawn. No price, no explanation. Just a choice. You step inside. The air is colder than you expect. Not unkind, just enough to raise goosebumps along your arms, as though the circus recognizes you, as though it remembers. You pass the familiar tents. You hear laughter from the carousel, music from a violin that shouldn't exist. A paper bird flies past, brushing your cheek before vanishing into the dark. Somewhere deeper in, a boy in a striped scarf walks with a lantern, lighting the path before others arrive. He nods at you, not a greeting, a recognition, the kind you offer someone you've never met but have always known. You walk until you find the tent. You don't know what's inside until the curtain parts for you. Inside, mirrors, hundreds of them. But none reflect you as you are. One shows you as a child staring at the sky. Another shows you older, asleep at a desk. One, near the center, shows you standing here, in this moment, watching your own breath fog the glass. And in the very center, a mirror that shows you standing between two figures whose faces you cannot see. But they are holding your hands, and the circus is all around you, alive and waiting. You don't ask how it's possible. You don't ask how it works. You know better than that now. You only step closer. And when the lights flicker above your head, you feel it. The pulse of the place, the threads holding it together, and something else, something like a heartbeat, but not yours. You smile. You whisper a name you don't understand, and the circus answers. It always does. The circus is yours now. Welcome back.